Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernández. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany, for having me. Looking forward to a conversation.
Me too. It's a really important conversation. Last month, the House passed in a very narrow vote President Trump's self-described big, beautiful bill. It's now in the Senate, and this legislation is over 1,000 pages. It holds his hallmark tax as well as immigration policies. You're dubbing it the bad billionaire budget. So to start off the conversation, what do you make of this budget? What do you make of the bill?
It's not really a budget. It's really a betrayal of working families of middle class Americans in favor of the wealthiest. And they are using this bill to give tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. And the biggest benefits go to 0.1%. Now, what does that mean? If you're making more than $3 million a year, you're going to do fine on this bill. But my constituents don't make that money. My constituents depend on health care that this bill attacks. This is the biggest cut to health care ever in history because it goes after Medicaid. It goes after Medicare, $530 billion taken from Medicaid. It goes after the chips. It destroys women's health care. So, in so many different ways, it is not good for my constituents. The Affordable Care Act, so many people depend on that. It's going to kick people off of the Affordable Care Act. People don't want to see that, and that's why we're calling it a betrayal and a bad billionaire's bill.
I want to talk about some numbers that stick out to me when I'm reading this bill. Raises the national debt by $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years. Changes to different social programs like SNAP as well as Medicaid mean that over 3 million people will lose food assistance programming, and millions more could lose insurance in the next 10 years. What do you make of those numbers? How serious are they?
Well, we know that the number you cite is actually bigger than that. The CBO and then all of the different reports say it's actually more like a $3 trillion increase. So if you care about fiscal responsibility, you should not vote for this bill. If you care about making sure that the children in your community are not hungry at school, you should vote against this bill. If you care about making sure that 16 million people don't lose their health care, their health insurance, vote against this bill. We were hoping that we would get four Republicans to vote against this bill, and we didn't get any. And we got a few, but they didn't vote against it for those reasons. They did not stand up for their constituents. I call it having courage. They need to have the courage to stand up for their constituents instead of rubber stamping Trump. And that's what we saw. It's a rubber stamp Republican Congress right now. And those are serious numbers. And remember that all of these numbers become intensified because when you shut down rural hospitals, like this bill will do, you're also impacting the local economy. If you do not have a rural hospital, we might lose five rural hospitals in New Mexico. If you don't have a rural hospital, people are not going to want to go and live in that community to work. So even people who have private insurance will no longer be able to get care in the community in which they live. I'm going to go visit two rural hospitals. I'm on a rural hospital tour in my big, beautiful district. Both of those rural hospitals are going to be at risk. And if they both close or either one of them close, a pregnant woman will have to travel 3.5 hours to deliver. She will have to travel 3.5 hours to get care if she has any kind of pregnancy related difficulties. I almost died during a pregnancy. The idea that I would not be able to go into an emergency room and get care, the idea that I'm going through contractions and I'm worried that my baby is coming really fast and I have to literally get on a road and drive for 3 hours. Imagine that. Think about that. Think about that. Time on the road just to get care.
And having a baby, obviously, that's not something you can really hold in. Sometimes time is of the essence when it comes to situations like that. And I've talked to Democrats, and they've all said people will die if millions of people are losing insurance coverage. And Republicans have countered that and have said, Democrats are fear mongering over this, and we're just trimming the waste, fraud, and abuse here. And we're also adding work requirements so more people join the workforce. I mean, what do you say to those arguments?
So people will die, and people, Senator Ernst in her incredibly callous and careless remarks that she doubled down on in a cemetery. How insulting is that? Because if you believe in life, then you should not be passing legislation that is likely to lead to 52,000 more deaths a year. Now, we're not making up these numbers. They are calculations that are made by outside entities. That 52,000 comes from Yale University that did the calculations. The number of people that will get thrown off is the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. These are real numbers, and we need to take them seriously. We should not be passing laws that will lead to that many deaths.
I want to read some things and some points that the White House is highlighting about this bill because this is what the White House's rapid response team posted that the big beautiful bill will quote make the Trump tax cuts permanent, raise take-home pay for the average family by as much as $13,300, increase the average worker's wages by as much as $11,600, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and support Made in America. What do you make about those points that they're highlighting?
Well, look at how they talk about that. They say the average. Well, the reason they get to that average is because they are taking the tax benefits that primarily go to the wealthiest Americans. I use the 3 million. If you earn $3 million or more a year, you're going to make a lot of money. Your benefits are going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you are a working family, you might get $1 a day versus they're going to get about $700 a day in tax benefits. That is not fair. Now, if you average that out, that's what you come to. But if you're a working class family, if you're a middle class family, you are not seeing that. Indeed, because of the way they're changing the child tax credit, because of the way they're changing and kicking people off of the Affordable Care Act, of Medicare, the impacts to middle class Americans and working families are negative. They're actually going to see, in many instances, a tax increase. And those things like the no tax on tips, they're actually very limited and they're not permanent. They're very temporary. Well, they are making the tax cuts for the wealthy and the biggest corporations permanent. Once again, a budget reflects your morals, and this is an amoral budget. It does not reflect uh, my faith tradition, which says that you should care for the poor, you should care for the least of us. Indeed, my archbishop in New Mexico said the church must stand in opposition to this because if we believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the church, we must stand in opposition to this bill. So that kind of shows you that if you actually have an archbishop of the Catholic Church carrying on and saying, this is not right, this is not consistent with our values, it tells you what this bill is really about and who it favors. Yes, it gives tax cuts, but it's sending them to the wealthiest Americans.
The richest man in the world also took issue with this bill. He was opposed to it before he got, or after he got rather, in that back and forth with President Trump on social media. Now he says he regrets some of his messaging, but he did call this bill a disgusting abomination. He also called it pork-filled, and that really opened the floodgates, it seemed, to some of your Republican colleagues really criticizing this bill. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene said she missed a part on one of the pages of the bill regarding AI and states being able to enforce it. Also, members of the House Freedom Caucus spoke against it, said that they were trying to raise the alarms, but these were people who voted for the legislation when the House was voting for it. So what do you make of that maybe perhaps Monday morning quarterbacking from your colleagues, Republicans who did initially support this bill?
So the Oops Caucus, you mean? The people that said, oh, I didn't know it was in there. You voted for it. And I need to remind people that 101 Democrats came before the Rules Committee. I sit on the Rules Committee. I sat there for 2 nights. I showed up, we worked through the night, all the next day and all the next night, where we heard Democrats show up and offer amendments to the bill. We read it. We knew all the bad things that were in it. We opposed it. they didn't even show up. The Republicans on the Rules Committee didn't even show up for most of the hearing, or they fell asleep at the hearing. If you would have read that bill, you would have known everything that was bad. If you would have just listened to us, you would have known everything was bad. And that oops caucus that after the fact said, oh, we wouldn't have voted for it. If we would have known it had a $3 trillion increase to the deficit. Well, guess what? We gave them another opportunity. We didn't give them. The Republicans, we just voted on a rule in the House floor that was a do-over, that allowed them, if they had a problem with the bill, they could have voted against the rule that we just passed a couple of hours ago, because that rule brought the bill back up again and made changes. It didn't address the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene said she had a problem with. So your statement that you would have voted against the bill if you would have known it was in, well, guess what? You just voted for the bill twice. We had 12 Republicans ask the Senate to take out the cuts to the energy tax credits because those will hurt their districts. They voted for the bill again. So when they say those things, it doesn't matter. You can't send a CYA letter that said, I wouldn't have voted for it if I would have known, and then vote for it again. We need to make sure that the American public knows that Republicans continue to vote for a bill that they know is wrong. And they say in tweets and they say in letters, this bill has things I don't like and I would have voted against it. But then they had a chance for a do-over and they still did do wrong.
I think one of the only things really Republicans and Democrats can agree on when it comes to this legislation is that there are going to be some changes in the Senate, and the Senate has a tough road here trying to pass this. And some major points of contention, it seems, with some Republican holdouts in the Senate seem to be cuts to the energy tax credits, as you said, the increase in the deficit by trillions, the increase to the debt ceiling by trillions, as well as cuts to Medicaid. I mean, what changes do you think we're going to see come out of the Senate?
Well, it all depends on whether the senators actually pay attention to their constituents and the hurts. Those energy tax credits, for example, they bring down the cost of energy because they are deploying renewable energy that Americans want to see. If you have a lot of sun, a lot of wind in your state, like New Mexico does, but mostly Republican states have all of these great resources, you want to see this deployed because it brings down the cost of electricity. And what they're doing is they're eliminating that immediately. I had an energy company come to me today that it's a cooperative. It serves rural areas. It serves Republican states and Democrat states. And they said if the bill passes as it is, they've already entered into contracts based on America's promise that we'd have these tax credits. When they have to cancel those contracts, they can't cancel them. They're on the hook because we said we'd give them the tax credit. They will result in about a 30% increase in costs. Working families, utilities are almost always like the second largest bill that they have to pay. Are they going to be able to pay 30% more on their utilities? That's what Republicans are doing. And they're doing this because they hate anything that has to do with renewable energy, because they are tied to the fossil fuels. And we know that fossil fuels for electricity generation is some of the most expensive electricity generation there is. So if you want to save your community money, go for the renewable energy. Use all of the resources that we have. And they seem to turn an eye to that. Even if you're not going to pay attention to the climate crisis that the fossil fuel does, at least pay attention to the cost to your community. And remember, if we don't address the climate crisis, your community is going to pay a lot more for home insurance, for business insurance, to deal with the disasters, whether it's droughts or flooding or heat deaths or wildfires. Those are real costs that Americans are seeing. We know, my constituents know, and across America, they know that the climate is creating disasters. And Republicans seem to not care. And they're going to make it worse with this bill.
There's a self-imposed July 4th deadline to get this to President Trump's desk so he can sign it. So GOP lawmakers really are up against the clock here as we are in mid-June right now. Are Democrat members of Congress like yourself, are you guys talking with Republican senators at all who might seem to be on the fence about this bill, talking about changes? I mean, what are you all trying to do to get your changes implemented in the Senate?
So I just came from the Senate a few hours ago, where I'm the chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, and together with Whip Clark and Senator Klobuchar and the women senators, we held a hearing on the portrayal of women in this bill because we wanted to be able to call out those impacts on women. We had moving stories by women who were dependent on Medicaid, were working three jobs and still needed food stamps, needed the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program to help pay for food at the end of the month, right? We're tired of all the paperwork they always have to fill out. We're caring for their parents, for their children, needed Medicaid to make sure their child did not die. And we were telling those stories because we were hoping that some of the senators who have voiced their concerns about these provisions would listen to those stories. And so we are working with senators, especially on the way in which this bill betrays women, especially because so many women depend on Medicare. Women are overrepresented in nursing homes. The cuts to Medicaid would hurt people in nursing homes. 40% of the births in the United States are paid for by Medicaid. So if you believe in family values, you believe in making sure we have healthy babies, vote against this bill. And that's what we are seeing. If we could get 4 Republicans to vote against this bill, whether you hate it because of the $3 trillion deficit, if you care about fiscal responsibility, vote against this bill. Or if you actually care about the lives of your constituents, vote against this bill. A little thing about this fiscal responsibility issue, in the Rules Committee, I keep pulling up this chart because they all say, oh, we need to have our fiscal house in order. That's why we're having all these cuts. The reality is, under Democrats, we always seem to bring down the debt, and Republicans increase the debt. So, Clinton was the last balanced budget, and then it went up in Bush. Obama brought it down. It went up in the first Trump. Biden actually brought it down, and now it's going to soar again over Trump. So stop telling the American people that we need to tighten our belts. We know how to tighten our belts. Democrats know how to tighten our belts. It's stop giving those tax cuts to the wealthiest corporations, and that's how we bring down the deficit.
That's a really interesting data point. And I'm curious, do you think that Democrats have a messaging problem when it comes to being a deficit hawk? Because when you think of lawmakers who position themselves and talk about themselves and message themselves as deficit hawks, you almost only exclusively think of Republicans.
So in the Rules Committee last night, we had a Representative Alderholt who wrote an op-ed that I pulled up and said, remember this op-ed you wrote where you were complaining about the deficit? Where do you stand now? And they just hum and haw because, once again, they're rubber stamping what Trump gives them. So even if they have spoken against the deficit, they're rubber stamping a deficit explosion. And they did it under the first Trump administration. They're doing it under this one now. And Democrats speak about it. I speak about it all the time. We need to make sure that people like you ask those questions so we can get that word out.
And I do not want to switch gears just for the final moments that I have you. I want to talk about the Recisions Package. The White House is asking Congress for $9.4 billion back after Congress appropriated that money, and $8.3 billion would be cut from foreign aid and $1.1 billion would be cut from public broadcast. What do you make of that ask?
So once again, in the Rules Committee last night, we hit them on this really hard because think about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The public radio is often the most important source of information during disasters. In rural areas, it is essential. It's how people get information about the weather, about local programming. You get a lot of local programming in public radio. And then the issues around, the children's programming, the educational programming that you get on PBS. What Republicans said is, oh, that's all right. Sesame Street will be fine because it's going to be streamed on Netflix. Netflix costs money. So this is another example of how they are saying, well, private corporations can make a lot of money, and we're going to just make it more expensive for working families. And then we take away this essential service that Americans depend on and support. And I also pointed out that Republicans used to support public broadcasting. They changed their mind after Trump tweeted that they tell lies, right? He doesn't like the fact that these news outlets are honest and they explain, and they always bring both sides. But that is not good enough for him, right? And so he tweeted out something. And so all these Republicans that used to support it, in fact, once again, Alabama, the Representative Alderhope from Alabama said, oh, my Alabama public broadcasting is marvelous. I'd like to save him. He just said, well, vote against this bill, right? But he didn't. And across states, you have Republicans who don't believe in this, will say something, but then they always cave. So there's the taco Trump, but the other thing that's always happening is those Republicans are always caving as well.
And
And then the last thing on that rescission is, remember, the cuts that they are making internationally are going to come back and hurt us, because when you cut access to healthcare and health research and communicable diseases, COVID did not start in the United States. It came over here, and you are cutting the money that will keep us safe. You're cutting the money that help keep America's interests alive and well across this country. And they are cutting the money for Ukraine specifically. So it's really awful, the number of babies that will die across the world because of Republicans' cruel cuts.
I'm not poo-pooing $9 billion. I'm not saying $9 billion isn't a big deal, but when you're looking at the national debt, that's really just a drop in the bucket. I was speaking with your colleague, Congressman Schweikert, and he said that that's less than a day and a half worth of all borrowing. So when you're cutting things like Sesame Street, when you're cutting things like foreign aid, when you're cutting things like public broadcasting, things that are relatively popular amongst the American people, I mean, what are your Republican colleagues saying? Is this a popular idea amongst Republicans?
Well, I think it's, once again, they are rubber stamping whatever Trump tells them to do. They do not have the courage to stand up for their constituents. And it is, I called it a molecule last night. It's not a drop in the bucket. It's a molecule. It's, less than 1%, less than, zero something 0.3%. It's very, very little. And remember, it is also that we spent over $100 billion on Doge in just 6 months. Like $135 billion or so on Doge. They cost the American, if they would have just never come into existence, we could have saved, all that money and kept public broadcasting. If, they have about, I don't know, maybe $34 billion or so in contracts to Musk. Well, let's just cut some of those contracts to Musk, right? There is a lot of corruption that we are seeing in this administration. If you cut out that fraud, the fraud of where you actually have Trump's net worth growing by $2.9 billion in the 6 months since he took office, well, let's cut out that kind of fraud, and then you could actually pay for public broadcasting.
Congresswoman, I really appreciate the time today. I appreciate your insight here. You are welcome back anytime. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be on with you and with all of your viewers. Muchísimas gracias.